welcome back to another edition of our outdoor photography series. Today we'll be talking to Christian Pondella, who is a multiple award winner. Christian is a top adventure sports photographer, probably one of the top in the world. He's been shooting for publications like Powder Magazine, Fstop, Sports Illustrated, ESPN Magazine, Men's Journal, Maxim, GQ, and many others. Like many of our speakers, he's multi-talented and does a lot of different work. Today we'll focus a little bit on mountain photography, but he's done commercial campaigns for Red Bull, Patagonia, SanDisk, Oakley, Clif Bar, and I'm sure many others. So welcome to our outdoor photography series, Christian.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Let's start there. Let's start with your background and your story. How did you end up where you are in doing what you're doing?
It all started, my photography actually started as a passion when I went to school in Colorado, college. I took a black and white photography class, and that's what sparked my whole photography. I just fell in love with the process of developing film and making prints in the dark room, and was just spending hours in the dark room just for my own fun, for my own pleasure. And I was naturally I was taking pictures of my friends going rock climbing and skiing in the mountains, and it was just it was just a passion thing. And I ended up majoring in fine arts with an emphasis in photography, just because that's what I enjoyed doing. After I graduated from college, I moved to California, to Mammoth Lakes, California, to be a ski bum, and I had a job working in restaurants at nighttime and had my days free. And I always took the camera with me for our adventures, and I just enjoyed shooting photographs. And then ironically, one day I was skiing on the mountain, and I was skiing with this guy for most of the day, and probably 3-4 hours into skiing, we're riding up the chairlift, and we started talking more than just, what's the next run and how much fun we're having. And I said, what do you do? And he's all, I'm the photo editor for Powder Magazine. And, I was like, wow, I like taking pictures. And so I sent him some photos, and he sent me back some constructive criticism. And then I made it a point to go out and shoot something really cool with some friends. So we went out and spent like 3-4 days in the mountains here in the Sierras near Mammoth, and made a trip out of it. And went up, and it was during the summer solstice. It was in June, and went out, we're shooting sunset photos and sunrise photos. And my friend wrote a story, and that following year we sent it into Powder. It ended up being a feature in the magazine. So because of that, that was kind of the jump start to my career.
What were some of the spots or the kinds of things that you were photographing at the time? Obviously, you had the background, studying it, and you had your passion. How did those things come together? Were some of those early pictures already of skiing, or were they something else?
The first photos that were getting published professionally were all ski images, and that was kind of the started it. And then my career started in the ski industry. So then I started working with professional athletes. Shortly after that, I actually got the opportunity to work for Red Bull. And when I started working for Red Bull, that really transitioned my career into all adventure sports, which, I was primarily shooting kind of in the mountains, skiing and climbing. So, to shoot adventure sports, it was an easy transition as far as athletes' perspective and what I've been doing. It allowed me to transition to shoot all different kinds of sports. And then working for Red Bull, it's like, I have shot in the last 20 years almost any sport that you can think of, from, downhill skateboarding to jet skis to BMX,
But let me ask you first about your gear, and I wanted to have you walk us through your gear evolution on the photography side and cinematography side. Obviously, again, you've studied, you started, I'm sure, with some older technologies, film, dark room, you mentioned.
Yeah, no, I love talking gear. So the first camera I ever owned It's actually sitting back here behind me. It's a Nikon FE. It's a manual film camera, one picture per pop. I progressed. I got a camera that was more than just a basic manual camera, and got a Nikon camera that would shoot, I want to say it was like 3 or 4 frames a second. The first like real professional camera I had was called the Nikon F5.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, which still to today I would consider the greatest film camera ever made for a sports photographer.
Some of the characteristics of the F5 that make you say that. That's a really interesting comment. What makes you think that?
When I shot Nikon back in the 90s, its meter, its ability to meter was spot on, and back then I would shoot mostly in shutter priority, where I pick my shutter speed and the camera would pick its aperture and do a bit of auto exposure for you.
Okay.
And it was pretty much spot on all the time. And when you're shooting, back then I was shooting film, mostly Velvia slide film. If you didn't get your exposure right, you're pretty much done. Like nowadays with digital, there's a lot more latitude on your exposure. I knew what that camera was able to do and where I was shooting, and the challenges of shooting in snow and in bright scenarios. The camera just had an amazing ability to nail the exposure, so that was one of the things I didn't have to worry about. So because of that, in just the build quality of that camera, or I actually switched over to Canon and ended up selling that Nikon camera, and I kind of wish I still never sold that F5 and still had it. I want to say it was around 2002, 2003. I was working a lot for Red Bull, and working for Red Bull, I was shooting events for them, a lot of the cool sporting events that they had. So that really helped my career as being an event photographer as well, because it's, shooting events is a lot different than just setting up a shoot with athletes and going out in the field, and where you can set stuff up and, and really dial stuff in. When you're shooting events, you gotta really be spontaneous and think ahead and know what's going to happen. And oftentimes in an event, you only get one chance to capture an image, because it happens and then it's not going to be repeated. Because I was shooting events for Red Bull, they wanted to get images posted right away, and so they were really pushing the digital photography realm of things. As
makes sense.
Shooting an event on film, you didn't get the photos till a day or two after the event, because you had to bring them to the lab. Oftentimes these events are on weekends and the labs are closed on a Sunday, so it wasn't until Monday or Tuesday that you would get the pictures from an event. So they were pushing digital, and back in 2003, 2004, Canon was really leading the charge on digital photography with the 1D Mark. The 1D Mark 1, I guess, was the first one. I forget what it was called, but it was an 8 megapixel camera, and Nikon didn't have anything quite to the specs of the Canon, and the Canon camera was actually good enough for publication back then. So I ended up making the switch to Canon because of their digital, the digital capabilities that they had. And so it was around 2005 that I made a full switch to Canon and got the whole quiver of lenses and the professional digital body.
What is in your kit, currently, either with Sony or with Canon? When you go on a mountain shoot, what are your go-to lenses? Do you have different sets that you take on different things?
My current photography kit is pretty extensive. I probably own 12 or 13 lenses. But because I do commercial work, I do mountain work, in the field work, a lot of times I'm hiking to a far remote destination. So I've got a combination of 2.8 zoom lenses, f4 zoom lenses, prime lenses, 300 2.8 lens. So depending on what I'm shooting, depends on what body I bring and what lenses I bring. But if I'm going into the mountains, that's why I'm switching, slowly switching to Sony, because weight and size is so critical for me. I'll bring f4 lenses and maybe one little lightweight, like a 50 millimeter 1.4 if I need something fast.
I've read somewhere that your style has been described of intimate, up close and personal. So I'm assuming that you like a lot of the wider lenses, and especially when you're shooting with athletes or with some of these mountain landscapes, that you're trying to capture that. Is that fair to say? Do you consider having a style, or what? How would you describe your work today, if at all?
I feel it's important to take the viewer who's looking at the image and put him in that place.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of times when I'm ski mountaineering, you know, we're climbing a mountain, technical mountain, and you're in a beautiful location. So if you're using a longer lens, zoom lens, you know, you're going to isolate the subject, and you know, you're not necessarily going to show where you're at or the surroundings of where you're at. So oftentimes I like using a wider angle lens, 16 to 35, or I've got a 17 to 40 f4, which is a really lightweight zoom lens, or 24 to 105 operating. And I like to isolate the subject, or not completely isolate the subject from the landscape. You know, so I want to include the landscape and the subjects. So, you know, it's often said, you know, if you capture a great image, if that subject wasn't in there, would it be a standalone great image? You know, and so you try to do that a lot. And you know, if you're skiing, you know, a steep couloir in the mountains or mountain face, you know, if you shot the subject super tight, that subject could almost be anywhere at that point. You know, it could be on a ski resort skiing.
Yeah, because in a way, the picture is telling a complete story, right? Almost. Right. I think I was first exposed to your work. Mammoth is one of my favorite places. I think the Sierra Nevada mountains of California are hard to beat. And places like Tahoe and Mammoth Lakes are gorgeous. I saw your work at a restaurant in Mammoth Lakes called Giovanni's. Every wall of that place has some of your images, which are gorgeous.
I've lived in Mammoth Lakes for almost 28 years now. Uh-huh. And for my lifestyle, what I like to do as far as just mountains, outdoor adventure, I mean, it's ideal. From the winter time to how much snow we get, to the stability of the snowpack, how many sunny days we get on top of that. It's just a great place to go into the mountains. You know, it's a safe snowpack compared to other mountain ranges like in Colorado or the Tetons or Utah, even the Alps. It's safer than the Alps for the most part. So it's a friendly mountain range in that regards, and it's a very large mountain range. And there's not a lot of people here either because we're not close to any major city. And you got Mammoth Mountain, which has amazing skiing from the start of the season to the end of the season. Oftentimes our season goes into July here. And then in the summer months, it's just so beautiful as far as mountain biking or road biking, or the rock climbing is world class. Between the four seasons of what you can do and the close proximity to how amazing it is to the town of Mammoth Lakes, it's really, for me, it's the most ideal place to live. I've got a story. This happened years ago, but I remember it was probably late March, and it had snowed because we've got, Bishop down valley from us, which is, it's like 4,000 feet lower down the mountain, 5,000 feet lower in the Owens Valley. I remember one day, it was late March, it snowed, and I was skiing like knee-deep, thigh-deep powder. And then that afternoon or that evening, I was talking to a friend of mine who went down to Bishop to go rock climbing, and he was down there rock climbing in shorts with no shirt on.
Right.
The same day I was skiing, like knee-deep powder. So we were both doing these activities on the exact same day, and they were kind of like polar opposite activities. And we're only literally 35 minutes from each other.
Right, right.
I'm skiing winter powder, and he's rock climbing in the sun with his shirt off. So
yeah, that's one of my favorite things about California, in a way, is that you can ski on Saturday and surf on Sunday.
Yeah, or
Mammoth,
do it the same day if you want to get up early and make a day out of it.
That's right. And Mammoth makes compacts that even more, which is really nice. And also for a photographer, you know, it's kind of like photography paradise.
It really is. For outdoor adventure photographer, it is photography paradise. Just 2 mornings ago, I did a photo shoot. We had to do a sunrise running photo shoot, and literally, I did this whole shoot about 400 yards from my house, and I was just kind of like blown away at the images that I captured, and it was literally, as the crow flies, it was 400 yards from my house. Like,
this photo, what's the story on this? This is like all 4 seasons into one.
Funny enough, when that image happened, I was actually supposed to be in Brazil for a job. And a week before I took that, or not even a week, days before I took that photo, I went to the airport in Reno to go fly to Brazil. And I went to get on the airplane, and they're like, "Do you have your visa?" And I was like, "Visa?" Because the last time I went to Brazil, you didn't need a visa. Well, apparently you needed a visa to go to Brazil. And so I didn't end up going to Brazil, so I ended up driving home. It's a story in itself. But anyways, so I went up to this lake just a day or 2 after that, and I'm up on Tioga Pass. And I went up with my paddleboard, actually when I drove home from Reno, I drove up to go look, and I saw that. So I called a friend, and I said, "Hey, let's go do some paddleboard, a photo shoot up there with the paddleboard." And she was into it, so we went up. And we got at the same location, some sunsets. The sun was setting behind those mountains. I got a stunning paddleboard image. And so then I posted that on my Instagram account. And my buddy here in the picture saw that photo. And he messaged me, and he's like, "Hey, I want to go jump off the ice in that. And let's go take some pictures of me, doing like the polar plunge thing." And I'm like, so then literally like the next day, we go up there early in the morning with the paddleboard. I shot a couple of shots at the paddleboarding, and then we're like, all right, he's warmed up. He's like, I want to go for a swim, go for a dive. So we got on the paddleboard together, and we both paddled out. That's all, it's only like 30 meters from shore. I dropped him off on the little floating iceberg, and he would jump in and swim to shore. And I shot a couple of shots, and I'm like, hey, let's see one of you just going like right underneath the paddleboard in front of me. And as it would have it, the water's so crystal clear, and it almost looks like my camera's like half in the water. But I'm hitting with the wide angle, and he's diving right in. And
there's another story that I was hoping you would talk to us about, a trip to Greenland that I think was featured in some of your work before. So I was hoping you would tell us a little bit about that trip and that whole project.
So this was a project with Will Gadd, who is a professional ice climber, and we've been working together for 20 years. And over those 20 years, him and I have traveled to 6 continents and over 20 countries capturing images. And as an ice climber, we've done some amazing stuff. But more recently, he's really gotten involved from kind of using his skill set to kind of engage like the science aspect and the global warming aspect of what's happening with this world and the changes that's going on. So the last few projects we've done, we've brought scientists on board to study, the glaciers on just recently on Africa and Kilimanjaro and the receding glaciers there. And this particular project was in Greenland, where we teamed up with the glaciologist, and the ultimate goal was to go inside a mullen, which this glacier studies the receding ice cap in Greenland. And just to take this scientist down into the glacier to where he can go study the water table of the melt off of basically, the rising, to kind of calculate, the freshwater melt off into the oceans and into the rising sea levels. So we used Will's skill set to go into a mullen, which is like a glacier cavity, and we ended up going about 100 meters down into the Greenland ice cap to study the ice cap and do some ice climbing down there. So that's kind of how these images, what this image was a two-part project. One, we went in the summertime to find the moulin when the water was going into it. There it is right there. And then we went back in October when it was freezing cold and the water would no longer be flowing, and we can actually safely go into, well, with relative safeness, go into the moulin and explore it.
It really goes beyond just storytelling. You know, it goes into the realm of photojournalism, which is so cool. What are some of your favorite places to go? You know, you've traveled the world. You were talking about going to almost every continent. What are some of your favorite places to go as a photographer or just as a person?
You know, one of my favorite places is Chamonix, France.
Okay.
It's a place I try to get to every year. Unfortunately, I don't make it every year. I didn't make it this year, but for me, that's one of my favorite places to go to, just because of the skiing, how accessible it is into the big mountains there, and I got a great network of friends that live there that I get to see when I'm there and get to work with. So that's kind of top of my list of places. Is Chamonix, France. It's kind of like the birthplace of alpinism and extreme skiing.
Okay.
You know, beyond that, you know, I always say it doesn't matter where I've gone, whether it's, you know, tropical vacation to Tahiti, or whether it's, you know, Africa or Greenland or Japan or Russia. You know, when I come home and I drive home to Mammoth Lakes and I drive into the mountains, you know, it's like no other place I'd rather be than right here in my own backyard.
Nice.
So, you know, where I live is one of my favorite places. But, you know, beyond that, like I said, Chamonix is a place I love dearly. I've had 2 trips to Africa on Mount Kilimanjaro, which were, you know, really memorable trips for me.
Okay.
You know, another place that I enjoy going to, which has been a few years since I've been, is Russia.
Interesting.
I started skiing there in the early 2000s. And the location where we would go was a little mom and pop run ski area, and we were like the first Americans to go there almost 20 years ago.
Oh wow!
And you know, coincidentally, it's where they had the Olympics in Sochi, where they do all the ski racing up there, and they call it Rosakuta is the name of the ski area, but the village is across Polyana, and so that's a place that's kind of close to my heart is that location in Russia.
For people that are interested in photographing mountain types of lifestyle, what advice do you have for them if they're starting out? You know, what guidance do you have for people that want to do photography more akin to what you're doing? How do they get started? What should they do? You know, what aspects of your career can you share to pave the road for others that want to follow it?
You know, like the one advice I've always given, and it's definitely what has been like the leading factor in my career is shoot things you're passionate about. You know, if it's mountains and outdoor adventure, obviously, if you're passionate about those subjects and doing that yourself, your photography is going to be so much better off because of it. You know, if your passion's people, you're probably going to make a really good portrait lifestyle photographer, you know.
Okay.
You know, and that's kind of, you know, if you're doing something that you're passionate about, you're going to be way more into the subject, and you know, it's going to show in your photography. You know, and as far as getting started, you know, nowadays with digital photography, there's so much information out there, and the learning curve is so fast to take a picture and see the image on the back of your camera. You know, so to get, you know, into you know, the world of sports and adventure photography, you know, it's going to help if you've got friends that are interested in doing the sports as well, or you're connected in that kind of sport in some way. It definitely helps if you're shooting professional athletes or top level athletes, because then your images are going to be that much better. And if you're doing the sports, for me, I go backcountry skiing a lot. Whenever, you know, half the time I'm not out there to actually capture amazing images, but I'm out there just to have fun. And during those times while you're recreating, you're always looking around and you're always seeing, and you'll see an image come up, and you're like, all right, this will be an amazing image, but it's got to be at sunrise, and it's got to be fresh snow, and you kind of formulate what's going to make a beautiful photo in your head, and it could take years before that actually happens, And I've got plenty of images that I've had that image in my head for years before it actually finally came to fruition, So I think, being out there and just doing it is going to help your photography. You'll have shots in mind, but then you've got to be flexible and know that things can change, especially in the mountains. You're dealing with Mother Nature, and so there's so many variable aspects to what's happening,
Are there any shots that you would consider, you mentioned that the diver being one of the shots that resonates the most with people, but as creative people, we sometimes have preferences that aren't popular. Do you have shots that you recall that you love, but that were never commercially, acclaimed or successful or recognized, but that are just shots that you really liked?
Especially like in, say, ski publications, I'll submit a selection of images to a ski magazine, and they'll keep maybe 30 images and say, okay, these are the 30 that we potentially want to, run, next year for the season.
Uh-huh.
Then it's the typical of, you'll get an email or a phone call saying, hey, your picture's going on the cover of the magazine, and you're all excited, and you're thinking in your head, okay, it's got to be this shot or that shot, and then they show you the photo, and you're like, wow, I would be the one that would be on the cover. So I kind of use that analogy. It's what I think might be the great shot, someone else may not, But there are, years where, like, my best images, my personal favorites don't get published, in the editorial world. But in today's world, with Instagram, everything gets put out there. So it's a different world these days, Image, you haven't popped it up, but it's an image that I took in Chamonix, France. It's that one on the right. The ski image, the ski tips in it. That one there. So that image, interesting story behind that. We talked about kind of like photojournalism, and a lot of the work I do, in particularly ski mountaineering, I approach it kind of like a photojournalistic approach, of where I'm just kind of capturing moments as they happen. We're not staging stuff; it's happening in the moment. So this image I shot, it's in Chamonix, France, and it's on the north face of the Aiguille de Midi, which, if anyone's familiar with Chamonix, you go up this tram called the Aiguille de Midi, which goes 9,000 feet up from the town of Chamonix to the top of the Aiguille de Midi, which is kind of, you're on the Mount Blanc Massif. You're staring right at Mount Blanc, which is the highest mountain in Europe. As you go up the tram, you go up the north face of it, and it's all glaciers and seracs and cliffy, and you as a skier, you kind of like, you fantasize about skiing down that, and more often than not, it's unskiable. But late in the spring, and in the months of April and May, when the spring storms come in, the snow sticks to the ice, and you can actually make ski descents down it.
Wow.
So for like 20 years, I dreamed about skiing the north face of the Aiguille de Midi, and finally I was there. This was in 2010. I was there for about 6 weeks, and it came into condition to actually make a ski descent down the north face. And so this image, my friend in the picture there, he's actually trying to find a rock right there underneath the ski tips to put a rope around and to rappel to the left down into a couloir.
Wow.
And see the rest of the way out. And when I shot this image, the ironic thing behind the story is I didn't remember shooting this photo. I remember the day, I remember skiing, and I remember taking photos. And that afternoon, like you do in Chamonix, when you're done skiing, you go down to town in the valley, and the après, you drink beers, and it's sunny and it's warm, and you're in t-shirts, and there's green grass, because this was like May 16th, I think, when I shot this. And we're drinking beers, and a good friend of mine's like, "Hey, you knew what we did? Let me look at your camera and see some photos." So I handed him my camera, and he's scrolling through the camera, and I'm chatting with some friends, and he stops at this photo, and he's like, "Hey, Pete, this is the one." And he shows me on the back of the camera this picture, and I look at it, and I stopped for a second. I was like, I don't even remember taking that picture. I remember going there, but I don't even remember. I don't remember taking that picture. So I guess the story behind this is that, now I remember, but at the time, right after taking it, I didn't even have recollection of shooting that image. And for me, it's one of my favorite ski mountaineering images, just because it kind of showcases what we're doing, and kind of as a viewer, you look at it and you don't really know what's going on, and it stops you and it makes you think, like, where are these guys going? What are they doing? And funny enough, I sent this into to a ski magazine, and the photo editor was like, "I like it, but it's distorted because you used a fisheye." And I was like, "Actually, I didn't use a fisheye, and it's not distorted. That's exactly how it looks. I just pointed my camera straight down at the picture." It looks like we're about to fall off the edge of the world, because we literally are,
I love that story because it encompasses multiple things that we just talked about. First of all, it encompasses something that's personal to you, right? It's telling a story that has more meaning than necessarily meets the eye for somebody that's just either flipping through or seeing it for the first time. Second, it takes a little examination. Like, if you look at it for 1 second, you don't realize the sheer, steepness of the cliff, and you start to think about how did that person even get there? How are they gonna get down? One wrong move could mean death. And like you said, it's the eye of the beholder. Somebody may not find it as gorgeous as somebody else, but at the end of the day, the body of work speaks for itself, and it's just
and it's one of those
phenomenal.
images. It's one of those images too. It's like, you can't just look at it for a few seconds and flip on to another one. You kind of have to. You have to stare at it and evaluate it, and everyone's going to interpret it differently. So, it's a storytelling image, and for me, there's so much story behind it, and it actually tells a story. So. That's one of those images you strive to get, and I was fortunate to be able to capture this image.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. How often do you print your photos? How big of a component to your business is that? How many pictures do you print?
I have a printer here in my office. I don't print very often. Every time I go to fire that thing up, the ink's dry, and I gotta flush it out, and do all this stuff. So I personally don't print that much anymore. When I sell prints, I outsource it, to one of the labs that, that's what they specialize in, and they do a great job. You can just go into a cart and do it. Interesting enough, I don't sell a lot of prints. It's not my business model. It's not something I'm pushing. It seems like a lot of my photos have people in it, and it seems like if I wanted to sell prints, I would have to focus more on just shooting grand, beautiful landscapes. Seems like landscape photographers have a better business at selling prints than what I do. But I do sell occasional prints, but it's not like I said. It's my business model is more kind of commercial work, and it's not on print sales. So I wish I did sell more prints, but I haven't really, put a whole lot of my efforts into trying to sell prints. So
fair enough.
But with that said, I would love to get into I would love to get back into a darkroom, just black and white film, and make some prints. But it's hard to find those. It's hard to find a darkroom these days.
Yeah. No, yeah. Sometimes you reminisce about the things that you used to do, and there's a little romance with some of those old technologies. I feel the same way about film.
There it is. Definitely.
Well, it was great fun. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing, not only the body of work you have, with the experience. I'm very much looking forward to my next trip to Mammoth Lakes. Hopefully you'll be in town. We'll have a chance to get together in person.